Hello and welcome to what is becoming fast my favourite tradition on the channel. Every year I read as many of the Women's Prize books that I can cram into my chubby little cheeks. I digest them and I spit out my opinions for you just a few days before the winner is announced. The advantages of this are: one, you can feel really invested in the Women's Prize announcement, which is the 11th this year. It's a Friday. And even if you haven't read any of the books, you can still be like watching and cheering for somebody. Two, you can sound really fancy in conversations where people go, "Oh, have you heard about the Women's Prize for Fiction announcement? What do you think will win?" And you can just borrow my opinions and pretend that they're yours and feel very accomplished. And three, it might give you an idea of what you might want to read from the both lists, the non-fiction and the fiction, a little cheat sheet to see what you might like. And that might not be what I like. Like, I'm trying, when I describe what I found in these books, even if I haven't really loved them, I'm going to tell you a little bit about what you might like in them and why it might be an amazing fit for you. My favourite thing in the comments is to discover people who have found their favourite books through me describing what I don't like about them. And that's what's so good about fiction and non-fiction and prizes and chatting about books, because you can really start to distill what you actually want from a book, which is completely subjective. That being said, all the books I'm going to talk about today are obviously quite good books. That goes without saying. They wouldn't be on a national long list or short list if they weren't already pretty fucking good, like really up there. So I think that goes without saying, I hope. So if I do say things about these books that are imperfect about them, I'm not saying these books should never have been written or published. I'm not saying that they're not worth picking up. I'm just telling you what I think when I'm comparing them to the incredibly high standard of winning a national writing prize. That is, you really have to be fussy if we're going to let people win that. And something that my criteria over the years has been one that I think crosses over with the general like official criteria for the prize, which is it has to be doing something new. Like, it has to feel like something we haven't seen before, or at least like playing with the genre in a new way, blending things, or just like giving us a quite fresh take on the stuff that's already been written. Or it has to do an old thing really well. A story that we've maybe heard but done it in a really thorough way, a technique that they've used that they've like really nailed this time and like built on the people before them. I'm looking for one of those things. And books can be good and really enjoyable and be in my top 10 of the year and still not really deserve the prize. Like, it's really hard for me to be like, this book should win, because I'm a fussy customer. Now, I love the fiction prize. I do. I love writing fiction. I love reading fiction. I am a huge fiction fan. So I've always reviewed the fiction list. The non-fiction list, however, is a new prize. This is only the second year it's been going. And I felt very invested in it succeeding, not only because I know that non-fiction is a particular problem with paying and accolading female writers at this time. Maybe not forever, let's hope, but it's very hard, and most of them are coming from fields of expertise where the pay and the respect discrepancy is even less. Also, non-fiction was kind of my thing professionally. It's like where I started out my career, working in publishing, promoting, and doing the sales for non-fiction. And as a non-fiction published author myself, I am like, this is really a selfish pursuit for me to make sure that female writers are adequately applauded. So for that reason, when the Women's Prize contacted me and said, do you want the fiction list or the non-fiction list, or would you like us to send you both? I said, just send me the non-fiction. That's what I really want to invest in this year. And they sent me the long list. I unboxed it on this channel, and that was really fun. So I've read a lot of the long list, but when the shortlist came out for fiction, I was like, I'd like some of that. I'd like some of that pie, please. Cut me a slice. And I did end up reading the whole of the fiction shortlist as well. So I'm going to tell you about both in this video. No doubt you'll probably be curious about the fiction list first, so I'm going to cover that. But I have also at least given a go to all of the shortlisted books of both fiction and non-fiction. But I've also read a lot more of the non-fiction long list as well, which I'll tell you about. Okay, are we in the situation? Are we all situated where we're going to be? Does everybody know what's about to happen? Let's begin with the fiction. Now, I want to say a lot of years trends or like themes like these like rear their heads, they emerge. Sometimes they're really obvious reasons and sometimes they're kind of mystical reasons. And this year a theme has emerged in the fiction shortlist that I'm not really sure the reason for. Maybe you can speculate in the comments. But the theme that I saw emerging was helping somebody else die, usually not the main character, somebody else, helping somebody else die, or being alongside somebody as they die. I obviously won't tell you which in every situation for obvious reasons, but 4 out of the 6 shortlisted books, at least that was a side plot, if not the main plot of the book. Speculate, I don't know why that was, but it definitely brought a really interesting dimension reading the books together. So if you're thinking about reading more than one of these shortlisted books at a time, consider that, because I think it was a really interesting thing to think about, like end of life and the philosophy of that and how you accompany somebody through that, and whether you place regrets on that or what expectations or whimsy or fantasy you place on like the perfect death and how we unpack that. It was really, really interesting, and I really enjoyed reading the fiction shortlist this year. I'm going to go in ascending order up to my one that I think should win. Not that any of these were like awful books or badly written, but just this is the order that I would put them in were I forced at gunpoint to rank them. So the bottom one would probably be Kingfisher by Rozie Kelly. It's about a creative writing professor who wants to be a poet, who falls in love with a much more skilled older lecturer who is a woman who is like a very famous poet. He's in a relationship with a man at the time, and they are in like a bit of a stalemate when it comes to their relationship and how open the relationship is. And he ends up having an affair with this poet and forms a quite unhealthy attachment to her. Even if the writing wasn't quite my taste, I could still see that it was very good writing. However, like as I was reading it, I could already feel myself forgetting it. It felt very familiar in the questions it was asking. It felt like a lot of the power dynamics just felt very like other characters I have read. They didn't feel like really like people that I'd never met before. The characters didn't feel singular in their formation, if that makes sense. And it's very similar in mood and tone and theme to a lot of books that have been on the shortlist and the long list for fiction before, the most prominent in my mind being Trespasses a few years ago by Louise Kennedy. Just comparing it to those books that I think are very similar in aim and tone, it just wasn't as good as those other books that I had read. So while it was fine, I didn't feel like the kind of dramatic things that happened in the book, because sometimes the characters would do really self-destructive dramatic things. I didn't feel like those moments were earned, and I don't feel like the characters were fleshed out for me to really believe that they would, like, I could differentiate them from other characters that I've read in incredibly similar books. So I don't think for me it qualified on the new front, and it didn't qualify on the thing that's been done before but done really, really well, because I could immediately think of comparable titles where I think it was done better or discussed in a more in-depth way or like structured better. For me, this one ended up at the bottom of my shortlist. Heart the Lover by Lily King, again, was a book that I felt was really well executed, but also just felt very familiar to me. It was about a couple that fall in love under like slightly socially stressful circumstances when they were at college, and they kind of have like a bit of an explosive thing, and then they don't talk for a couple of decades. And in the second half of the book, you see them meet again decades later to reflect on what has changed, what has happened to them since they last met, and if they have any regrets. This is something that I am susceptible to be incredibly well invested in, but unfortunately I've read other books that have come out this year that have tackled this topic, I think, in a much more vivid and captivating way. One that comes to mind is Kieran Millwood Hargrave's Almost Life. If you're looking for a book that does that premise, please choose that one. I think like the language is much more interesting. I think the characters are much more distinct. And unfortunately, I felt like the second half of Heart the Lover was much better than the first half when it came to like quality of writing and like formation and stuff. And I would either have switched the two, or I would have like intermeshed them a little bit more so that we were seeing both decades happening at the same time and having like a kind of time comparison thing. But I think the way the book was structured, if I hadn't been reading it for this, I might have DNF'd in the first half and not stuck around for the second half, which was much better, I think, in the roundedness of the characters. And I think maybe stripping the characters back in the first half when they're younger was an attempt to make them seem more naive and simple, because that's what happens when you're younger. But I don't think that was like an accurate reflection of what people actually are like, and I just wasn't sure about it. I wasn't completely mad about it. I obviously finished it, and I do give myself permission to DNF books, as you'll see. So the fact that I did read the whole thing means that I did have a good time, but not a good enough time to say that this should be a winner. Dominion by Addie Chitchens. This is a book about a boy called Wonder, or Wonder Boy, who is the son of a priest in a small community called Dominion. And it is told from a lot of perspectives, but mainly two. His mother, who absolutely dotes on him and is also putting up with a lot of crap from her husband, the Reverend, but loves him too, and is like quite subservient at the beginning of the book. And a girl that believes that she is Wonder Boy's girlfriend. However, Wonder Boy doesn't see it that way. And it's told from both their perspectives as they start to realise that Wonder Boy isn't really who they think he is, or he's not as perfect as they think he is. Again, I think this book was great in loads of ways, but for me, I think the quality and the depth of the narrative was much stronger with Wonder Boy's mum and much weaker with Wonder Boy's girlfriend, in inverted commas. And I felt like that contrast in the book kind of let down the momentum of it. I just wish the book was only written from his mum's perspective, because her perspective was so rich and good, and her voice, like her narrative voice, was a lot clearer and more interesting, and like lots more interesting stuff happens to her as well. Whereas I think that the younger girl, again, like her character wasn't as fleshed out, and I worry that's because she was a younger character, that was like a kind of narrative device to try and make her seem young. But actually, I think it's more realistic to give those characters as complex narrative like worlds or intellectual worlds in their head, even if they're not thinking straight, and even if they're making choices that are very evident, like the front of your brain hasn't grown yet because you're young, you're a teenager. I just didn't feel like it was as strong. However, I did really like the way it was written. It was beautiful and lyrical, and in the audiobook, which is where I consumed it, there was some music, which I freaking loved. So it was definitely more my style of writing, and I would definitely be open to reading other books from this author in the future, because I did think it was brilliant. It was just not perfect enough to win. In my third place is Flashlight by Susan Choi. This is a book about a younger girl and her dad who go on a walk on a beach in Japan, and they go missing, and a few hours later the girl gets washed up to shore without her dad, and she thinks she's like 9 or 10 at the time. And after a while they believe that her dad got swept out to sea and died, and she goes on and lives her life believing that her dad is dead. It's told, again, maybe this is the other theme in the fiction books, it's told from two women's perspectives, so younger and an older. It's told from her mum's perspective, who loses her husband, and from her perspective, who has mysteriously lost her dad. As they live their lives, and as their lives intersect with lots of other people, and as they got on with all of the complicated feelings that they have, as her mum goes through other relationships and relationships with other children in her life, and as the daughter goes through like the rest of puberty without her dad, and like meeting people that she might date or settle down with and trying to work out who she is, they both start to realize that they didn't really know that much about the dad, or the husband, the guy that disappeared. And all I have to say about that is it's worth staying around to find out what that is, because it was really interesting and it had lots of political history behind it, and I found it really fascinating. And you also get a glimpse into his childhood and what his life was like before he met his future wife and had a child. And I think that while it was quite a slow book, and I think I don't think there are issues with the pacing, I think it's more a taste thing, but I've seen people say it was slow, and I would agree with that. But God knows I can tolerate / sometimes really love a slow book. This is definitely a book for you if you don't mind getting given loads of irrelevant information that doesn't feed into the main plot, but gives you loads of background story and information on the characters. Like, we go down lots of different avenues in their lives, and we meet lots of characters that arguably aren't that relevant to the main plot, like what happened to the dad, but they are really interesting small explorations of what makes up a human life and what can influence people to act and feel the way that they do, and like those sliding door moments of like things that could have been different. So if you enjoy something that's less narrative driven, even though there is a big secret and you find out the secret and that's really interesting, interesting, but it's less about the narrative and the journey, and it's more about what's those kind of you can tell that I wasn't allowed computer games growing up. What's the name for computer games that aren't about like earning points or doing challenges or jumping over things or crashing into things, and they're more about like exploring a world, like open world? I don't know. You just wander around and look at what's going on in the computer built universe that you're in. That's what it feels like. Good. Anyway, it's third on my list because I think the other two above it are better, but this is a very good book and I really enjoyed reading it, and it is something that I would recommend to other people, and I have been thinking about it ever since. In second place is The Mercy Step by Marcia Hutchinson. This book must have been so hard to write, and I've seen it done before, but not very often. And not always well. And I'm glad to tell you that this is one of the moments where it was done really well. And it's the concept of a book written in first person from one person's perspective, except they are getting gradually older as the book goes on. And because you're writing in the character's narrative voice, that can be a really challenging thing to write in a believable way, in a like invisible way where you stop thinking somebody's writing this character and you start really feeling like you're hearing from the character, and also just in an enjoyable way. And I really enjoyed this book. At points it was really funny, and we actually start with the girl with Mercy being in she's either in the womb or she's at least in hospital after just being born, which I agree is a little unbelievable that somebody would remember that, but we're not remembering it. We're hearing from her in real time. So like arguably babies do have consciousness and they do remember stuff. And I happen to be one of those weird people who like, I remember stuff from when I was really young. Like I remember getting my nappy changed. Like I told my parents exactly where in the room they would change me, and like I can remember like details that they're like, the only way you could have known that is if you remembered it. And I'm like, because I do. So I think I started forming memories that I can now recall at about 1.5 years. Maybe that's why I enjoy reading narratives from that perspective, because I'm like, I genuinely remember feeling like that. But yeah, it's about a girl called Mercy who has a really complicated home life and lots of brothers and sisters, and the only place that she really can hang out and feel like herself and like she gets her own space is on what they call the Mercy Step, which is one of the steps in your home. Like she had like steps going up in her house, and they named one of them the Mercy Step because it's where she would always hang out. And I remember having a step as well growing up. Maybe this is just I don't know. I also had a step that I was like, that one's my step. Like we can't be sitting one step up and we can't be sitting one step down. This is the perfect place to sit on the stairs. And I used to spend a lot of time on the stairs as well growing up. So enough about me. This is a book about really interesting aspects of her character you see as she grows up, is that she starts to slowly separate herself from like the hero worship of her mum and start to more put herself in a caregiver role of her mum, and kind of also side-eye some of the choices her mum gives us. So we live through very gradually all the stages of toddlerhood of like being obsessed with your mum, like worshipping your mum, being, you know, scared that anyone would hurt your mum. And then as you grow up, like slowly separating yourself from that and realizing that you can't protect your parents in the way that you want to, and you also don't always agree with their choices. And also this idea of trauma in the home, because she has a really hard home life and she like a lot of really horrible things happen to her. This idea of being aware that when you're going through something horrible, you feel like you're out of your body and you're like watching the scene. And then as you get older, starting to realize that you can control that, and there's actually a power in being able to step out of yourself and see yourself from the outside, and then being able to hone the ability to, by choice, step back into your own experience and zip yourself back into your body and like be able to control that superpower in some way. And I think it was a really beautiful way to talk about trauma and how we distance ourselves from what we're going through. And I found it really moving and really sad, but also very funny at points as well. So that was like really satisfyingly confusing. I think that's also really hard to pull off as a writer. And I thought it was just really brilliantly done. Like hard to land that plane, but beautiful to watch Marcia land it. And yes, the only reason the book above it is because I just had a bigger emotional reaction to it. And that's like really the only reason that I'm putting it slightly above. These two were very neck and neck, I think, from an objective perspective. But from a subjective perspective, I have to say it would go to The Correspondent. Again, a really hard narrative framework to pull off is like a book of letters. What's the word for that? An epistolary novel? An epistolary. Every time I say that word, I think I'm saying it wrong. Epistolary? A book written in letters. It's really hard to pull off emotional attachment to things that are happening when you write a book in letters, and also to be able to cram in enough craft into your writing, because obviously you still have to write in the voice of the characters, and the characters all aren't award-winning novelists. So that's something that's really hard to pull off, and I think she pulled it off absolutely incredibly. This is a collection of letters from and to a woman called Sybil, who is an older woman who is slowly losing her sight, but has like the main value in her life since she stopped her professional life is writing letters. She's always had a passion for it. It's something that she feels really strongly about, and she admits in the novel that she feels like she can only really express herself through letters. She finds it harder to express herself in person when she's seeing people, which is a good narrative trick to make sure that she has most of her most important conversations in her life through letters, and we get to read them. But we also get to read all of the letters that other people write her back. She has like a long distance best friend. She writes to her children. She writes to her neighbours, even though she lives near them. She writes to like everyone. She writes to like old colleagues, and she has like a really nice, sweet relationship with a boy who's really struggling with life, who is like the teenage son of one of her old colleagues. She has all these really nice relationships in her life, and even though she tries to distance herself from them, she always ends up circling back to them, and it kind of chronicles her struggle to stop pushing down memories that she's been pushing down for a long time. And because she knows that she's losing her sight, she knows that she only has a certain amount of time to process that kind of stuff and communicate with people. So she's trying her best to let people get close to her, and letter writing is the way. And it really genuinely made me sob. I was cleaning my kitchen towards the end of the book, and I was listening to it in audiobook, and I literally had to just stop with like the tea towel in my hand and lean on the side of my kitchen counter and just do like a really theatrical, like from the gut sob. And that being said, of course, it wouldn't be a favourite of mine if it also wasn't really funny in parts as well. But I really think that it was a really tender, well executed novel about how we relate or fail to relate to each other. And of course, it was written from an old person's perspective, which again is how to get to my heart. It was realistic, but also beautifully written without being like artificially elevated, and I just thought that it was like a real feat of literary prowess, and it can't be denied, and I think it should win. But if the Mercy Step wins, I would also be ecstatic about that. I think they would both deserve to win. So take a moment to readjust, have a sip of tea, because now we have to get on to the non-fiction list. Right, this is going to be a little bit longer because I did read quite a bit of the non-fiction long list as well as the shortlist. I gave everything in the shortlist a go, but I did allow myself to DNF. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you a rundown from not as good to the best of the shortlist, and then I'm going to tell you what you might have been missing from the long list. And I think that, unfortunately, reading some of the long list titles kind of ruined me for reading some of the shortlisted titles, because some of the long list titles, in my subjective opinion, really showed up some of the shortlist titles. There were some really good ones on the long list that I really don't want you to miss. By just reading the shortlist, it kind of distresses me a little bit, as you can see from me holding my own forehead. But that's what prizes are. Like, you pick different judges every year because they have different tastes and different opinions, and that's what's healthy about prizes. But I do feel like this year I was a little bit more separated taste and opinion wise than I usually am from the judges, and I think that the non-fiction in particular exemplifies that problem. So the two at the bottom, which I did DNF on the shortlist, were these two books. They are both about hotels, and they have very similar writing devices, even if maybe not completely similar in location or tone. But one is called Hotel Exile, Paris in the Shadow of War, and then the other one is called The Finest Hotel in Kabul, A People's History of Afghanistan. They're both about hotels going through states of war and like what happens to them and who settles in them over some decades. And I did give both of them a chance. I would say I probably got through about 30% of each one before I DNF'd, but I wanted to talk about them together because I think they suffer from the same problem for me, or something for me as a reader that I don't care for as much, and that is info dumps without context. I really think that we jumped in very hard into these very two specific situations for the People's History of Afghanistan, I would say. And like, for the fault of everyone, the general public's understanding of the history of Afghanistan is very sparse. Mine's not very good either, but in general it's very sparse. And the problem with Paris in the Shadow of War and like centering World War II is that I think sometimes in the Western world, people think they know too much about World War II, or it's assumed that people know too much about World War II, but they very rarely have like that much accurate information or that much joined up information about World War II. So I think both of them really needed for a general reader to connect and invest and stick around for the info dumps was more background, like more of a wealth and like immersive information about the setting of these places and the history of these places before we meet the hotels and the places that they're situated in. And perhaps that does happen later in the books, but I feel like 30% is a very decent amount of time to wait for that, and I didn't feel like it was adequately addressed. I also felt like in both books, so many people were introduced so early. I listened to a review of this book, and the person pointed out that early on, there are too many characters and too much information dumped at the beginning, and you're not sure what you're supposed to remember and what you're not supposed to remember. And some of the characters do circle back and some of them don't. It kind of broke the thread of like listening and understanding for me, having so many characters with sometimes very similar situations or names thrown at you all at once, rather than really honing in on your subject and picking like a very few characters. I'm saying characters, but you know, they are imagined representations of real people. That's you know, non-fiction can't be completely accurate, so that's why I'm saying characters, people that we follow. I think that both of them just suffered from a lack of background, intriguing storytelling that would like get the general reader to understand and like really invest in where they are before we meet all these characters, and also just generally like too much information all at once and not quite enough earning of that attention, I would say. But then maybe I just have a really rubbish attention span as a reader. But for me, both of them, I was really struggling to keep track of exactly which parts I needed to remember for later in the book, and exactly what some of the political or social or historical background was in order for me to understand what they were telling me. And it may well be a failure of me, the reader, but I do think that maybe these aren't meant for a commercial general reader. And that's okay. That doesn't make them bad books, but I do think that means that maybe they're not, like, that's a really hard thing to do, and I don't know if it means that they should deserve to win. You can disagree with me in the comments, but also I shan't be finishing them, I don't think. This one is going to be the hardest for me to justify why I didn't finish, because I know it's a fan favourite and lots of people that I respect intellectually and spiritually and emotionally really loved this book. But Mother Mary Comes to Me, which is a memoir from Arundhati Roy, who is a famous fiction writer. It's a memoir about her very complicated relationship with her incredibly complicated mother. It's hard for me to be like, oh, didn't have enough narrative arc or whatever, because like, it's somebody's life. I want them to tell the truth about their life. But I really struggled to stay invested in the story. And I'm 100 pages in, and that's usually the point where I do DNF, and I am going to let myself DNF this one. But not because it wasn't really well written, or not because it's very good. I just felt like something was missing, and I can't actually really understand what it is at this point. And I don't know if it's probably me. It's probably a me thing, like a me character flaw thing. But if anyone else has read this book and like has struggled to work out what isn't clicking for them, I would love for you to tell me. But for me, it just wasn't strong enough in any of the elements that I've been looking for in a winner, for me to put it forward and be like, yes, this should win the non-fiction prize. But I also don't know, like, I know that she's a really well-respected writer, and I know that lots of people love the book, and I can't really put my finger on why it isn't working. But for me, and maybe I will work that out in a few months. Sometimes like after a while, when you've like put a book down for a really long time, you can then be like, that's why I didn't like that book, or that's why that didn't click for me. but I'm so close to it at the moment. Like, I've only just DNF'd it that I'm just unsure as to why. But for most of it, I was just thinking, I don't think this is my style of book. And that's not, I know that I would love to read her fiction because I've heard really good stuff about it. So that is not me giving up on Arundhati Roy as a favourite writer of mine, potentially in the future. But I don't know if memoir was the best place for me to meet her as a writer. And I suspect that because people already know her writing, it connects more to them and like the understanding of the whole story in general because of that. Let me know in the comments below. However, 3 books that I do think deserve your attention. Nation of Strangers. Sorry if the light's getting a bit grey. It's getting a little bit dark here because I've been talking for too long, but I can't help it. Nation of Strangers, Rebuilding Home in the 21st Century by E.C. Temelkuran. This book is about displacement and experiencing trying to take refuge in other countries and the bureaucracy and the paperwork that goes along with that and the kind of liminal space that you live in and who else you meet while you're trying to seek refuge and asylum that way. It's a memoir and it's very, very good. It's one of the few books where like really I have a lot of highlights of like individual sentences of paragraphs that really made me think. Like I was covering this book. I thought it was really, really beautifully written. The reason that it's not my winner is because I think structurally it's more of like a stream of consciousness, and I don't know if that was always like, it's obviously truly how it came out for her because it is like a document of her life. But as a book, like I felt like it wasn't consistently strong the whole way through. And I think at some points it lost its way as to like what it was trying to communicate to us. And I think on a structural basis, it wasn't up there for me, but with the style of the writing and the quality of the writing, it was really like undeniably incredibly strong. And I did like a whole Patreon podcast that was quite long talking about all the things I learned from this book and what other thoughts it made me think about and how it relates to like patriotism and nationalism and what we think a home is. And it was I'm really glad that I read it, but for the purposes of this exercise, I don't think it's the perfect book, and only the perfect books can win the perfect prize. Now, at least at one point in this video every year, I eat humble pie. I eat my hat. I eat my words. And in this instance, it is going to be with Artist Siblings and Visionaries by Judith Mackrell. I kind of turned my nose up a little bit about this cover and the premise. I was a bit like, why should I care about 2 painters? I don't know if this one is hooking me in, who lived like 100 years ago. I don't know about this. It looks really thick as well. Like that was kind of what was running through my head, like in my childlike way of like, I don't know what the hook is here. Like, I'm not sure about this, and I'm not sure about the cover, and I don't know if the blurb really gets into, maybe it does, now I'm looking back at it, maybe it was me, it doesn't get into really what the hook is about, but let me tell you, the hooks are there. The tea is piping hot. My God, you will scold your tongue. I loved all the information that was in this book. What they should have started with, if they were tailoring this blurb to me, which God knows in the future, maybe they will, to everybody who picks up a book, there'll be like an AI generated version of it just for you. But if you had told me this was about 2 Welsh painters from Tenby, I would have been like on board like that. We love Wales. We respect Wales. Not enough is written about Welsh history or the people who made it great. And that is a really important bit of information I would like to relay if you also feel that way about Wales. This is about 2 siblings who grew up in like a lower middle class household and had limited access to education and opportunities, although more than most, who both had a really strong talent for painting and drawing and artistry, except that one of them was a boy and one of them was a girl. And it's kind of like that Shakespeare's sister thought experiment, except it's not a thought experiment, it actually happened. And how these 2 siblings like go through the world together, both trying to be painters, and what opportunities they they're given and how they give to each other, and maybe how they are rivals at some points in their lives, and like how different their lives pan out, even though their like background is identical and their talents were arguably the same, or some people say, I'm no art expert, Gwen, the woman, was better. Now I'm going to read from my notes now because I think I'm not going to remember all of the wacky things that happen in this book, but like I've written, the tea is piping hot. sapphic romance, siblings being in love with the same woman, affairs, chaotic Victorian polycules, custody battles, sending hand-drawn nudes to the wrong famous painters, being forced to give birth in a caravan in the middle of nowhere because your husband is going through a fetishizing Romany people phase, chasing mother-in-laws through pelican enclosures, and that is just the first half of the book. Now, the reason that I'm not letting this book win my fictional list of the top books is because I don't think the narrative voice of the writer was very strong, and for me I think a book is really well written and executed when the writer themselves has like a recognizable narrative voice, a bit like with Jane Austen, or in fact even people that have written about Jane Austen like Lucy Worsley has an amazing like authoritative history voice, but it also has its own character and its own point of view, and it like really intrigues you and is a little bit cheeky. And another example of a writer who's a woman who does that is like Cheney McDonald, who wrote God is a White Man. Like there's lots of books like that I would compare in like the content is as interesting, but also I don't think that part of the writing aspect was like that up to scratch for me. But to be fair, she had her hands full because the research that it must have taken to put all of those stories and all of that information in this book must have taken freaking years. So I get it from a reader's perspective. I can forgive that, and I still really had an amazingly good like time. But also just for the purposes of like, should it win the prize? Probably not, because that aspect of the writing I think has been done better. But this is still done very well and in a way that you can totally enjoy it, and I think the information in it is really important. And it also made me think a little bit about how the woman who played Lavender Brown, stay with me, in Harry Potter recently had a big Guardian video made about her because she's been selling like fetish videos of her hair on OnlyFans to get money because she hasn't been able to make us enough money as an actor or a writer. And this is like made me think about how like tale as old as time this is still happening, and how Gwen in this book, while her brother can afford to just be a painter and like explore his painting, she has to spend a lot of the time that she would have spent painting and honing her craft in being a model for other painters and like making her living that way. And how, I don't know, I think there's lots of like modern parallels as well in it. And also what I think is interesting about this book is that it isn't that her brother is a knobhead or that he like discards her. He's always trying to root for Gwen and always trying to be like, you should put Gwen's paintings in the gallery. Like you should do this. Is Gwen okay? Can anybody fund Gwen? But it never works out that way. And while he is like also a knob, like he is a knobhead to all of the women in his life, it's not only about Gwen and Gus, the siblings, but also very much features the lives of all of the women in Gus's life and all of his baby mamas, of which there are more than one. And it features like he meets most of those women because they're also painters and artists, and how they have to compromise their lives around the opportunities that they have. And I think you meet them at a really interesting time in history, like kind of turn of the century Victorians, Edwardians, who technically there's nothing stopping Gwen from going to art school. It's not illegal, it's just harder, and she's treated differently while she's there. And like technically there's nothing to stop women from getting a divorce, but it's harder when there's lots of like social, you know what I mean? Like it's an interesting time to study the life of a Welsh woman living in England at this point, and I thought it was brilliant. However, my winner from the shortlist that has been presented to me is definitely The Art Cure by Daisy Fancourt. This is a really gripping, really well written and really well researched book by a professor of psychobiology and epidemiology, can I say that right, who works at the University College of London, who is at the forefront of loads of research about how can I summarise this? If you don't go to art galleries, you might die. I think that's probably exactly how she would want me to represent her incredibly nuanced and detailed findings. But like, that's what I'm taking from it. If you don't go to art galleries sometimes, or see some live music, or read books, or engage, or have a little sing every now and then, have a little dance, you're probably going to die early. You might get dementia more easily. You're probably going to get stressed and therefore ill more often. you're going to have less friends, and your life's going to be shit. And as if we didn't know that anecdotally, we now have the science to back it up. And I love this book. Again, I've got at least 2 Patreon podcasts on the Gumption Club listing all of the things that I learned from this book and like quoting them and being like, but what does this mean about this? And many a post-it note was put in, many a highlight was made. And I think this should be, whether it will be, who knows, but it should be a seminal text, kind of like Ultra Processed People or like another text like that, that really stirs up a national conversation about what we should change about the way we approach something. And she talks about art being the 5th pillar of health and how we don't spend enough time doing it. And like doing a leg exercise or a spin class is just astronomically not as beneficial to you as doing a dance class when you look at your whole health overall. And from that, I will justify all of my future actions and life decisions, and I'll hear nothing more about it. But I really think that if you're going to read one book, and also a great book to give to your parents, if they're people who don't engage with the arts in their old age, I really think that this is the permission they need to spend more time singing little ditties and joining a choir and going to the cinema and the theatre a little bit more often. If we have like this productivity deficit in our society that means that we think spending time on art is unproductive and not as healthy as doing other things, and it's just, it turns out, not true. And this was worth reading all the other books to get this information out of this book. If I hadn't enjoyed any of the other books, I still think all my time investment genuinely would have been worth it. Please read this book. Okay, unfortunately, my decision for what should win the non-fiction prize for this year would have been harder to make had some of these books made the shortlist, because I arguably think that they're all as good, if not much better, than the stuff that made the shortlist. Yeah, I'm going to say that. Bar the Art Cure, of course. But I think that all of these would come above most of the shortlist for me. Finding Albion, which is the book about Zakia Sewell looking at the myth and folklore and quest for a hidden Britain, and how she fits into that as somebody who isn't racialised as white, how she is made to feel British and how she is made to not feel British, and also just about a lot of pagan traditions. And she goes to a lot of like summer solstice and winter solstice tradition, like traditional celebrations. And I learned a lot from this book, and I think parts of it were beautifully written. I don't think that consistently every chapter was the same quality, but I do think the chapters that were really good were really freaking good, and I'm never going to give this book away. I have far too many highlights and like moments where I was just like, oh my god, yes. So I think it was really, really good. Not a flawless book, but really freaking good. Don't Let It Break You, Honey by Jenny Evans is, on the face of it, a book about a girl who is in a feature film called Twin Towers, which I've never seen, but it's a bit of a cult classic in Britain. And when she's a teenager, and at the closing party, she gets assaulted by an incredibly famous musician that she just calls the famous man. And essentially she eventually goes to the police about it, and then the next day all of the confidential information she's only ever told the police ends up in the newspapers. And it kind of pivots her life into a completely different direction, and she ends up retraining to be a journalist, to go on a trek to find out how that happened and what the relationship is between the police and, at that time, the news of the world, and our confidentiality and our information. And it's it will make you really angry, and also really uplifting in a lot of ways, but just really angry. And I think that the way Jenny Evans tells it is so compelling. She also shares a lot about other stuff that happened in her life, and it's really gripping. Like, it could almost, the amount of twists and turns it takes, plot pivots, and like what's going to happen next, and like, oh my god, I can't believe it. What, the whole time that? It could be like a long podcast. Like, I was listening to the audiobook and it kind of felt like it was like a gripping podcast series where every chapter I was like, and then what are you going to do? Like, what are you going to do next, Jenny? Oh God, what? Really, really well told, really well paced, and also talks about a really bloody important issue. And all I can say is, reform the police. My God, my God, my God. And also the newspapers. To Exist As I Am by Grace Spence Green. I have already been championing this book quite a bit, so I won't talk about it too much, but this is about Grace's perspective of what happened to her when she was training to be a doctor, and when I think she was 21 or 22, and she was walking through Westfield shopping centre, and a man fell onto her, ruining her health spine for the rest of her life, and really changing how she relates to the world, and her choice to keep studying to be a doctor, and how that choice has impacted everything else she does. Whether that's to do with like her medical profession and what she does, but also how she relates to other people, and like how it's forced her to be vulnerable. And I think she also has a really interesting perspective on the man who didn't die because he fell onto her, and how she feels about him, and how she feels pressured to feel certain things about him that she doesn't want to feel and doesn't naturally feel. And I think that part in particular was really interesting, but the whole thing was a real eye-opening listening experience for me as somebody who considers themselves to understand a bit about the disabled community and how to be respectful and how to like integrate. But also, again, with people on the left, we can sometimes read a little bit and then assume that we understand everything or that we're completely right on everything. And I think this book is a bit of an essential read, and I now want to read all of the books that she lists in the back that she loved on this topic as well, because I genuinely find it really interesting, and I'd love to read even more about it. But please read this book. I really think it deserves to be on the list. /win. I was shocked not to see it on the shortlist. And finally, Sarah Perry's Death of an Ordinary Man, which I think again humbled me. In the video where I unboxed this, I think it's visibly evident that I'm not that excited to read this book. Just from a marketing perspective, I'm not really sure if there is going to be a hook. I don't think the cover is very good, and I don't think the blurb really outlines how special this book is. It's really special, and it's written really well. Like, just from like a writing talent perspective alone, like regardless of subject matter or tone or structure or like anything else on the list, if it was just on writing ability alone, Sarah Perry knocked it out the park. She deserves to win both prizes if it comes to that. I can't believe this wasn't on the short. I can't believe you've done this.
I can't believe you've done this.
Why wasn't this on the shortlist? It's about the moment when her and her husband are meeting up with his dad. They've arranged to meet him at a market, and he's walking towards them, and at the same time both of them have the same thought, which is, that's a dying man. And they don't have any like medical evidence to back it up. He just looks unwell, and they both have this instinctual, there's no going back from here. He was well last time we saw him, and we can just see on sight that this man definitely has something wrong with him, and he doesn't have long to live. And they end up between them as a team taking him for a diagnosis and walking him through all the stages of the end of his life and all of the logistics that comes along with, and all of the confusing things to do with the NHS and all the admin that you have to do when you are helping somebody die at home, in this really poetic, sensitive, generous way. And I think there is something really beautiful about her love for her father-in-law as well. I think there's a lot written about fathers and daughters, fathers and sons, mothers and you know what I mean? But rarely that real bond that I think is very special and very rare, but does occur between people and their parents-in-laws, and how beautiful that relationship can be as well. And also just like how distinct she makes her father-in-law, like as a person. He's just so fleshed out, and I was so, even though I know that's the premise of the book, and it literally says it in the first line of the blurb says, Sarah Perry's father-in-law David died in the autumn of 2022, only 9 days after a cancer diagnosis. And yet still, as I was reading the book, I was like, don't kill David. David can't die. I'm attached to David now. And surely he can't. Like, you become in denial. I'm actually a bit upset talking about it. With her, you become in denial about his cancer diagnosis in real time as you're reading it, because how generous and how clever and how interesting her writing is makes you feel like you knew him. And I think it's essential reading if you're somebody in your 30s, 40s, or even 50s, and you know that at some point you're going to have to deal with your parents dying or help a partner through a parental death, because I think it like walks you gently through those stages and that confusion before you actually have to go through it, hopefully. And also all of the like weird logistical stuff that could probably be better and is really confusing when it comes to working out what somebody needs, and the strange dealings of like letting all these like random people into your house that you hope know more than you about death and the body, but you've never met them before, and they're like meeting you at this really vulnerable stage of your life, and you're letting them help this person that you're really protective over. And it's also like a little bit like To Exist As I Am, a little bit of like a look into how the medical profession intersects with the other parts of our lives in ways that we don't think about all the time without being a medical memoir. And I think that like the fact that I'm getting emotional about it now and I read it like months ago says a lot. And I really think it's a really special read, and also would be a great book club read. Like, I think that this one in particular would be great for a book club, but also The Art Cure and this one. Those would be my 3 book club picks, I think. Anyway, I've rabbited on enough, and the sun is literally falling out of the sky, so I should go. Thank you so much to the Women's Prize for sending me the non-fiction list. They always send them to me with no expectation that I will talk about them and no pressure to talk about them positively. And as you see, I have made full use of that freedom. I've talked about them as I actually genuinely feel about them. But the Women's Prize is a charity and I really respect them, and I think they're doing brilliant work. And as somebody who is an author themselves and has been a courtside witness to the perils and the hardships of the publishing industry and what financial problems it can have, the uplifting of titles and like the genuine career changing trajectory of somebody's writing life that even being on the long list for the Women's Prize, let alone the shortlist or winning, can have for an author is absolutely incredible. And I am so excited to keep reading the books that they recommend and showing me parts of the bookshelves and the lives, and therefore like the complexities of how humans can be, through forcing me to read books that I might not otherwise have picked up. And that's something I'm forever grateful for and has changed my reading life and writing life forever. So thank you so much to the Women's Prize, and if you ever want to donate to them, please do. I do. I think they're brilliant. And please let me know in the comments below if I've persuaded you to read any of the books, or if you've read any of the books, what you've thought about them, especially if you disagree with me, or you think I should un-DNF some of the ones I DNF'd. Always happy to be corrected or change my mind. Thank you so much for watching, and to the Gumption Club who make these videos possible. It meant that we didn't have to have a sponsor. It means that I can uplift the Women's Prize while giving them money rather than asking them to give me money, and spend time reflecting on these books and diluting them so that I can shortcut your way to finding the book that genuinely fits you, rather than just panicking and picking up a random book. I want you to pick up a book that you're genuinely going to love. So I hope this video helped you do that. And if it did, you can thank the Gumption Club if you want to join. And we also do like a book club at the moment. And I do weekly podcasts where I talk in more depth about a lot of these books and any of the books that I'm currently reading. And then you can click below. Is that everything I've got to say? Probably. I think I might go and read a comic book now, or a graphic novel or something. I think maybe I need to give my eyes a little bit of a break. Can't wait to see who the winner is. Stay tuned. They're announcing it on the 11th. So I'm going to be on social media with bated breath. Frog snog out.